Hello, and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown, and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter.
Roses. So today's show's all about roses. And Chris, where do roses come from?
They originated from China, but now can be found absolutely everywhere.
They're worldwide now, aren't they? A bit like our potato that we talked about a few months ago.
Indeed, yes. And roses have taken quite an interesting journey over the years, of course, famously with the War of the Roses.
Yes, definitely. That was Lancaster and Yorkshire, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, or we could almost go into a cricket mode here, couldn't we? But yes, basically, it was in the 1400s when the famous war between the House of Lancaster, which obviously was represented by the red rose, and York represented by the white rose, famously called obviously the War of the Roses. But then the rose was joined basically to create the Tudor rose, which of course is the rose of England.
Yeah, and that's got something to do with our flag as well, hasn't it? The white and the red, and that's
Indeed.
Where the colours come from on the flag. I
Indeed.
believe. I don't
Yes.
know if that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yes,
but-
so roses have had quite a big influential part on our history.
And they've been used in medicines. I know it's back in, I think it's the 7th century. The Middle East was famous for sort of using roses for medicine, and they've also been part of our diet. I understand you can eat roses or rose petals even.
Yes.
And obviously more recently, since we've learned how to distill things, rose water has become quite a popular scent. And that's used in, like I say, sort of skin tonics and things like that. And the scent of roses is certainly something I always think of when I think of roses.
And childhood-wise, creating your own rose water was sort of part of the parcel of growing up, wasn't it? And perhaps a good thing to be getting involved in during these summer holidays, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely.
So on our podcast today, we're going to be joined by James Taylor and Joe Davey from Wharton's Roses. And we're going to be looking at all the aspects of growing roses commercially, and obviously some really good tips on how to get the best of roses from our gardens. But I suppose, Peter, when we talk about roses, there's just so much terminology to be had, isn't there?
Yeah, there certainly is. I mean, I've learnt masses about things like budding and rootstocks, and I mean, where do we start? Some of the terms used in the interview are quite technical, so yeah, please bear with us if you've not come across them before. But I guess it gives us an opportunity to go through where do all plants start in the roots. So talk about rootstocks, Chris. What's a rootstock?
So a rootstock basically is a variety or a species which has been developed to allow the variety which you're going to graft onto to grow really well. So it's got lots of vigour. As we hear, one of the rose rootstocks they use is Rosa laxa, which basically doesn't get any suckers. It grows really well, and it provides the perfect root system for the varieties you're going to graft onto to perform well.
So they're not quite the same as apples, where most apples are grown on quince rootstocks. They're actually grown on rose rootstocks, but they're just very vigorous rose rootstocks.
That's it, yes.
And another thing that I'd never heard of before, the term briar.
Yes.
I mean, rose sweet briar is one that I know as a mail order, it's a bare root plant, but a briar is another term.
Yeah, so if you have a briar on your rose, generally that's a sucker. So a briar will form on certain rootstocks which are very apt at producing these nasty suckers. They used to be really a major problem in growing, because if you remember maybe 20, 30 years ago, you were forever desuckering your roses. So this is when you get this shoot which grows from the where the graft happens, the little sort of knobbly bit on your stem grows below that and produces a long shoot. And often the briar would have, it would be paler in colour, and also it wouldn't have as many, or could have more leaves than the variety you're trying to grow as well. So that would have to be removed. Now, removing briars basically means taking them at a smaller size as possible. So normally the advice is to very carefully, using a pair of gloves, basically pull with a sharp tug to remove the briar so it comes away from the stem. As close to the stem as possible. If you try and cut the briar, of course, then you're leaving some of the stem to regrow, which of course will form another briar.
So you've got to really chop it out, or
tug it out.
Ideally, if you
that's
can.
It, yeah. But you just don't seem to get the problem with suckering these days, with newer varieties or newer plants you're buying from garden centres, because they're using this wonderful laxer form. And it was Rosa Cana, which was, of course, the dog rose, which actually created all these problems many, many years ago for us. But that's how horticulture moves on, isn't it? We find better varieties. But it just means that your variety, so if it's your Arthur Bell or your Arthur, I'm thinking of a good varieties like your Timeless or your wonderful ground cover roses you might grow, don't get suckers. It's because of the fantastic varieties of rootstock which are being employed by the growers today.
Okay, and then moving up from the rootstock, obviously we're talking about grafting, which is where you chop the top of the plant off and stick a new bit of plant on from another selected variety, and that's called budding, isn't it? That's what's referred to as budding.
Budding, and I think specifically it's called tea budding, because literally you cut the tea into the stem, and you pull back the parts of the tea from the stem, and then you insert obviously the variety, if you like, the cyanwood, the variety into there, and that process is obviously done quite quickly, quite efficiently. It's done at this time of the year for obvious reasons, because the plants have to be in active growth for them to completely obviously take. You have to have that sort of warmth of the sunshine of summer and the autumn for that to happen, unlike your apple trees, which of course we do in the winter when the sap flow is just beginning to start.
Okay, and just thinking about the sort of the bud that you're putting on, roughly how long is that, Chris? Is that literally just a couple of millimetres a bud, or is it a sort of twig?
So they would prepare the buds. They'd have somebody going along there, say they work in a pair, and they would be producing the buds ready to drop into that tea bud. So the process is quite succinct. And if we could hopefully for our podcast show notes, we'll try and find a little video to show that, because I think it's quite an important little process to describe, really.
Brilliant. So just thinking, there's lots of different types of roses, aren't there, Chris? You've got your climbers, your shrub roses, your bush roses, your ground cover roses. I mean, even hedging roses that we sell bare rooted in the winter. Talk me through those a little bit, can you?
Yes. So if you think about the archetypal Valentine's rose, that's the beautifully formed hybrid tea, so that's the HT rose. So that's the one we tend to think, and it produces you could grow it as a bush rose. Often they're grown as standards as well, so they can be grown on a long stem. Obviously very popular these days, or coming back into popularity. They used to be incredibly popular a few years ago, and they usually have a decent size flower, and often they're fragrant as well. So that's your good old Valentine's rose as your HT. Then you've got a rose called a Floribunda. Now, that's had a bit of a name change. It's more commonly called in the gardening world as a cluster flowered. So basically these produce flowers in trusses. And basically, very beautifully, you find that one flower opens after another, so they don't open all at the same time. So cluster flowered roses tend to flower over a longer period, which is good. And again, you can get a wide range of varieties and lots of scent with those as well. And then you're talking about the smaller, more compact varieties. The patio roses have become hugely popular. Only grow, 45 centimetres, 18 inches tall, so perfect for containers, for window boxes. I mean, I've seen patio roses grown in hanging baskets. They can be grown that compact.
So they could be your sort of focal point in a hanging basket or a planted container, and then you could put some nice trading plants around the edge to sort of really set the plot off.
Why not? Yeah, and especially if you choose the varieties which repeat flower, which is obviously a term when we're choosing roses. We always look for the word repeat flower, because it means it's going to flower at least twice through the growing season. And then we've got the miniature roses. Those generally are even more compact than the patios, and they're the varieties you might see in the houseplant department.
Okay. And they're not so fragrant, are they? They're just grown to be beautiful little bushes.
Yes,
they're nice, pretty little things, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, and they do. And as I say, they usually sometimes you can grow those in alpine beds, and in sink gardens. You can grow them in very small containers, so they're perfect for that. You've got then the ground cover roses. So these used to be incredibly popular for basically covering soil as a ground cover suppressant, so using a plant to cut the weeds down, to obviously keep the soil weed free, and to create this sort of blanket effect.
Okay.
Becoming more popular again, we had a few years ago the county series of ground cover roses, which are still available, but now they've been taken over by obviously some more recent introductions. And I think Joe, in the chat coming up on the podcast, talks about those in quite a bit of detail. And then we've got climbers and ramblers. They're the stars of the garden, becoming more popular because of the fact that they produce a decent framework. Now, a climber tends to be pruned or trimmed back every year to encourage it to produce new shoots which carry flowers. So you can have a climber that's sort of 6-8 feet, which can look spectacular. A rambler, as the name suggests, is allowed to grow ad infinitum. It'll grow everywhere.
Okay, because I think my mother's got some rambling roses growing up a tree. I mean, the stems on them must be, I want to say, 3 inches across, and she reckons they've been there sort of a good 20, 30 years, and occasionally you see a flower sort of, I want to say, 20, 30 foot up in the tree, and it's really interesting that they're not sort of parasitic, or they're not, they don't damage trees per se, do they?
No.
They're quite gentle plants to grow in conjunction with the trees.
If you've got a large tree or trees, they're perfect for going up into that space. Kifsgate is one particularly good variety, often recommended. One we obviously sell at the garden centre here, and garden centres generally, it's always the go-to. And there's one called Wedding Day, which is an amazing rose. That's a white single-flowered rambler, but that will go 18, 20 feet maybe.
Okay. And rambling roses, obviously we sell bare root roses here in the winter. Things like, I'm just thinking dog rose and Rosa rugosa.
Yeah.
Are they ramblers, or are they're climbers, or what are they? Are they natives?
yeah, but they're sort of species roses. So they can be grown as a hedge line. You can add those to your mixed native hedge if you want to add a lot of colour and hip colour during the autumn or winter. Provide some food for the wildlife as well.
Yep.
Or you might want to grow them like I do in my garden. I've got Rosa rugosa dotted around the garden just to give me bits of colour at this time of the year, and I just love the hips for the wildlife. So you can actually use them ad hoc within the garden. If you've got a mixed border, then Rosa canna, the dog rose, looks really good with its amazing rose hips in the autumn. So very adaptable. Obviously native species, so they love our climate, and they certainly enjoy plenty of moisture as well.
And if you're growing them in the hedge line, obviously great burglar deterrent and
Yes.
predator deterrent. They got some good thorns on them from memory.
They have indeed, and certainly will keep obviously the aphids they have at this time of year perfect for the young fledglings to feed upon, or the mother birds to use on there, and of course then for providing some wonderful food later on for our feathered friends later in the season.
Yeah, because thinking back to my mail order days when I was picking the roses out of the field, the Burnet rose, or Rosa spinosa, that was our...
Oh, that's a nasty one.
No one ever wanted to have to get an order with that in, because that's a real burglar deterrent if ever I saw one, isn't it? But thinking about sort of the properties of roses, I mean, obviously they have lovely smells and they have glorious flowers, but they're also very good for bees, aren't they, Chris? And there's certain ones that are very well known for attracting bees, shall we say?
That's right. Yeah. So when you look at the sort of the typical garden roses, we would be selling for ornamental use. They all obviously produce quite tight blooms. You want basically varieties which open out and expose their centre parts of the plant for the pollen and for the stamens. So really, we've got to look at those more native species. So your Rosa rugosas, whether that's white or pink or red, your dog roses, your Rosa spinosas you mentioned, anything which has a very open flower. I think there's a geranium called, there's the rose geranium, which is particularly nice, and that has a very open flower. They're going to act as wonderful magnets to your bee population.
So they're not the dare I say it, the F1 hybrid type ones, are they? They're the total opposite. They're the natural sort of.
These are the bricks and mortar
ones
of the rose world. These are the basics, which of course a lot of the rose breeders use in the process of breeding roses anyway. So a lot of the qualities a lot of our older traditional varieties are obviously a part of the DNA of many of the new varieties we have in our gardens. So very important.
Yeah, and there's also some hybrid roses that the bees love visiting as well, aren't there? So let me just name drop a few here. So Morning Mist, and there's also Lady's Blush and Grouse and Partridge, not Alan Partridge, just Partridge, and Kew Gardens, Scarborough Fair.
Yeah.
So there are a few, and then there's Ramblers, which obviously grow nice and large, sort of the Francis Lester, Rambling Rector, Bobby James, and they're good for flowers, they're good for bees and wildlife. So,
and a lot of those varieties you've mentioned there, Peter, they're available in garden centres, so they're not exclusive or elusive from the bee. They're very much there, but they're probably their main property is their climbing habit or their flower colour. But the great advantage of them is they're going to be good for our bee population.
So just thinking about all the different rose growers out there, Chris, I mean, there's lots of specialist rose nurseries, the likes of Peter Beals, Harkness, Mattocks, David Austin. There's a lot of things involved in roses, isn't it? It's not just as simple as growing certain seeds and off you go, you've got a crop of roses. There's a lot of things involved, isn't there?
I think the process is lots of breeding is done under glass, normally in greenhouses, and then they obviously do then the selection of the seedlings, and then of course you get a nice plant or a number of plants. You then obviously from those take more seeds, obviously grow those on. So the process can take between 5 and 7 years. So before you get anything which is saleable. So if you're launching a new rose at Hampton Court Flower Show or sometimes at the Chelsea Flower Show, that rose has taken a lot of time and effort and has gone through many processes to get there, and of course it has to be then marketed to be sold to us as customers, and maybe through to garden centres as well.
Because I suppose that's why some of them are very expensive. I mean, the hedging roses that we sell they're just basic roses, aren't they? And whereas something like a Golden Jubilee or something like that, it's been really bred for the specific sort of flowers and the smell that it creates. And I think also a lot of roses these days are usually a vehicle for promotion for a charity. So a lot of roses, like at the moment we've got the Sir Tom Moore rose, which has been bred by Harkness Roses, and I think if memory serves me correctly, I think £2.50 of each of the roses sold at garden centres goes to the Sir Tom Foundation. So they're used as a vehicle to raise awareness. So those sort of roses obviously do capture the public's imagination. I know the garden centre sales here have been very good of the Sir Tom Moore rose, but lots of other roses follow that sort of trend. So never underestimate the fact that when you buy a rose, it's going to be around for a long time if you look after it well, if you give it lots of TLC, lots of feed, lots of water, and it will give you many years of colour. And lots of fertiliser, I should imagine, as well.
Lots of manure, yes. Manure seems to be the most important thing with roses. Anecdotally, of course, that's more of a problem these days to get, obviously, a good supply of well-rotted, probably 1 to 2 year old manure to be putting on your rose beds. But certainly, it doesn't do any harm.
So just thinking about the roses and where we get them from, Chris, Waltons have been a supplier of ours for many years now.
Indeed.
And they're in a bit of a unique situation, aren't they? They're a grower rather than a breeder.
Yes, they are. They obviously they basically trial and select their varieties from a wide range of rose breeders. So they're in that unique position of basically cherry picking the very best of what's out there in Europe and obviously the UK, and obviously they can then bring those on board to offer to us garden centres. Yeah. Okay,
and they're a family-owned company from memory, and I think they started, was it 1947?
Seven.
They're an old established company, and
third generation. So
same as us then.
Indeed. Yes,
excellent. Yeah. And I guess if they've been there that long, they should hopefully have picked up a few tips for us on how to grow roses.
Most definitely, and I'm sure that will be many of the questions we'll be asking them now.
Excellent.
Roses remain one of the number one most popular flower according to surveys by Gardener's World and Gardening Witch. We're delighted today to be joined by James Taylor, the nursery manager at Wharton's Roses, and Joe Davey, marketing on the roses front too. So welcome to you both on this this lovely bright day.
Hello.
Great stuff. Lovely. Great to hear you. So probably obviously to try and sort of set the scene for our listeners, a little bit about Wharton's Nurseries. Where are you in the UK?
We're in Norfolk, on the Norfolk-Suffolk border. So we actually have one site in Norfolk and one site in Suffolk. So we're regularly crossing the border, but in East Anglia.
Excellent. Now, for our customers who come to Buckingham Garden Centre, of course, they know the Wharton's Roses by far. Obviously, very, very popular. And I suppose perhaps we should start by saying, why do you think both James and Joe here? Why do you think roses continue to be such a good garden favourite?
Well, I think there's sort of the nostalgia element. I think most people can remember roses in their parents' gardens, their grandparents' gardens. So there's that nostalgia angle. They're relatively easy to care for once they're established, and they come in a huge range of colours as well. So I think people can fit them into whatever colour scheme they've got. You get various sizes, so you can get little patio roses, you can get climbers, so they'll fit into most spaces as well. And of course they're hardy, so wherever you are in the country, you can grow them. So I think there's a few reasons for their continued.
I think also that they give over such a long period. I just now started a new garden, and the roses which I planted are obviously outperforming the shrubs at the moment, because the shrubs are very, very early stage. And so we're basically from May to November, roses will be giving you something. So that's very much in their favour.
Yeah. So James, as far as growing them, obviously that's your responsibility at Wharton's as nursery manager. Now, can you again paint the picture of how roses are actually produced? Because obviously when you tend to see pictures of rose fields, that's quite different to the way people perceive them when they come into the garden centre and buy their wonderful pots of roses at this time of the year. So can you sort of explain sort of the process of getting a rose from the field to the pot for us?
You're talking about the actual sort of grafting process, or the actual process of selection of varieties?
Yeah, well, let's start, I suppose, with the selection, because I suppose it's where it starts from choosing the right varieties. So that would be good. Yeah, if you could start us from that point, that would be really useful to get an idea of the process.
Well, if I dive in here with the selection, because our selection process actually starts with trials.
Mm-hmm.
So we work with breeders around the world, actually. So rose breeders in Germany, France, Australia, and we have trials both in the field and in containers, and we sort of assess them.
Mm-hmm.
We select the best performing varieties. So the varieties that we think will perform well in the garden, but actually also perform well in a pot, so that they look good in the garden centre. So that's the first stage, is the trialling process, and that can take between sort of 2 and 5 years, depending on the sort of variety. So once we've selected that variety, obviously then it goes into production, which is where James comes in.
So once we actually establish that they do well, then that's a matter of how much confidence we've got in that variety, how much we think we're going to bud. So to start with, we'll either bud 50 or we'll bud 300, and then watch them. And if they continue to do well, then in the following year, then we can bud into the thousands. So we're basically but there's always a surprise somewhere. So more often than not, a a good rose in the fields maybe not doesn't enjoy being in the pot. And obviously to you people, that's obviously essential. We supply you with roses which look good in the pots.
For sure. Now you mentioned about budding. When would that be happening, James? When would you be doing that in the field?
Basically, as from now.
Okay, so
we are starting budding our standard roses tomorrow, which is late as the season is late this year, and we will start on our bush stocks on middle of next week.
Okay, so these are all done in the field, so far removed from when they're in the container. So how long from actually budding, the grafting process, does it actually then take to get the plants to the container? What's the sort of timeline on that?
Quite a long time. A long time. You bud in June and July, August. Hope it's early August, and then the process will be the following September, basically when they're going into pots.
Okay.
Not the September coming to, but the following year.
So it's probably 2 years from budding to arriving in the garden centre.
Right. Okay. So the plants then would be. So would they be pruned in the field? Would they be trimmed back to sort of try and create a decent shape for the container? What would be the process in that year or the year running up to being put into a container?
Do you want me to run through the processes, or
just an idea of what you would do? It would be very useful just to get an idea of how they would be grown in the field.
So basically, if we start with basically we prepare the land in the autumn, and then we then plant any time through from February right through to, well, this year was mid-May. Mid-May this year, because we've had as you know, we had a very, very difficult year with the sort of drought,
indeed,
and then the frosts. Unprecedented amount of frost in April. So we planted some, then we actually stopped, and because everything was too dry, and then we waited until the rains came again before we planted the last 30%, which has worked, because we certainly had plenty of rain since. After that, now we have to. Most years we have to irrigate. That's when I first started working here. We didn't know that wasn't needed, but with the changes to the seasons and changes to the weather, the irrigation is now a sort of a critical part of the operation, really, and we have been irrigating our briars to keep them going. And now we had some nice rains. Now we don't need to, but we've had to obviously invest in quite a bit of equipment to cope that. And without that would be very, very difficult now, because of the erratic seasons.
Of course, yeah. Climate change is affecting all areas of gardening and horticulture, isn't it?
Yeah. So then moving on, like I said, we bud June to August, and then we cut the tops off the roses during the winter months, and then in the spring months, April, May, our staff will go through and sucker and stop the single shooters. That's not every grower does that, but most of the garden centres want three plus shoots on bush varieties, and we find that if we don't stop the single shooters, that we would struggle to manage that. And then we start lifting in September, and we lift from September to January, and at the same time we start we're obviously grading from September right through to April, and we're potting September to May. So basically, we got lots of cold stores, and we're having to batch roses to give you good fresh stock. Not very early on, we didn't have the cold stores. We potted everything at the more or less nearly everything was graded and potted by February, March. But then we got to the summer, everything came and flowered all at once, and then we had plants which the garden centres didn't want. So we're now with the cold stores and with the batch, and we're just trying to continually have a batch fresh, ready for yourselves most of the growing season.
Yeah, indeed, and that means our gardeners and our customers have a plentiful supply of variety through the season, which is great news. James, we talk about roses and we talk about the way they're grown. Of course, obviously, most roses are grafted. Perhaps you could just basically explain that process, because it's quite specific, isn't it, to the way roses are grown?
Well, yeah. Well, our roses are grafted. We call it budding. So basically, the root stocks we plant are stocks which we buy in mostly. Well, they're actually all from Europe now. And basically, the stocks we buy are Laxa stocks, which run or have so the sap runs from now till middle of August. If we wanted to bud into September, we would have to use maybe multiflora stocks, where the sap runs longer into September. So basically, soon as you can see a rose bush putting on a nice big fat bud, breaking into colour, and you can then cut that stem, and if it show white pith where you cut, that tells you that's ripe. And basically, we de-leaf it, we de-thorn it. And basically, where the leaf is cut, we take away we cut that off the stem, and remove the piece of bark, and then we tea-bud that into the briars, into the rootstocks.
Right, the tea-bud is the significant bit there. Now, once that's done, obviously, is that a two-person operation if you're grafting those in the field? I do seem to remember seeing pictures of people working in pairs. How is that logistically done at the nursery?
Oh, that's correct. You've got the man putting the bud in, and then you got his partner who'll come along putting a patch over, which will callus over within weeks, and then that patch just perish and wears off, and then the bud flourishes from there. And then also obviously the other chap is helping and just basically keeping the bud a budding. And we've got people now who go all around the world budding, and they come to Europe for this time of year, and then in the winter months, they'll find a way down to Australia and New Zealand. Normally, obviously this year they had problems.
Yeah, so they follow the roses basically, don't they, around the globe?
Yes.
Yeah. So on that score, when I was going back a few years, certainly when I first went into gardening, we were always told when we bought a rose that we should always keep the rose bud sort of proud of the soil, keep it exposed. So I suspect now we've got new rose scionwood and obviously new rootstocks. That advice is somewhat different. Am I right in thinking?
No, that's still something which I would continue to do, if you're growing from cuttings, that's a different story, and you can plant them deeper. But no, you basically you want the stock just prior to the surface of the soil, basically.
Okay. That's very interesting. That sort of conflicts with, I know there's a couple of other growers who say that you should just slightly bury them. So I don't know. I'll believe you, James, in this instance, because that's what I was taught at college. Yeah.
Where you are in the world, if you're in Poland or somewhere like that, and Germany, where you get a lot more severe temperatures, then you would probably go deeper. But no, we're not happy if our potting is just the union just on the surface.
Right, that's good. Thanks for the clarification there. That's really good. So so that's the process, and I know we take in a lot of your bare root stock in October, which we pot up and we sell them as root wrap roses, which obviously prove very, very popular these days, and it's good to see that we can obviously offer them in the gardening trade, and they are available. And then of course the potted ones generally take over in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've looked at the sort of production side of things. So I think, what sort of essential advice would you be giving to anybody who's thinking about perhaps growing roses for the first time?
You want to make sure you were talking about putting in a garden, are we?
Yeah, indeed. We're talking about garden situation. So a young couple, first garden. They're thinking about sort of setting. They've got a limited budget, but they've got some money available to put some roses in. What sort of advice would you be giving them, perhaps, to get the best possible start?
Well, a good site. I would not under any tree.
Okay.
Definitely not. And basically a good ventilated site, so where, or preferably, you don't want to be north facing ideally, but you basically where at least where you get a decent amount of the sun all day long. You don't. That's not essential to get sun all day long, but obviously that does help.
Mm-hmm.
So then you obviously want a good site, and also a good decent soil, and also you need to put some well-rotted compost or manure or something for soil moisture retention.
Mm-hmm.
to really give the rose something to work on to start with. Because once the rose is established, that's off a go. But you do have to, as with all shrubs, you have to look after them for a while, though.
You do indeed, yeah.
Just one point, sort of a good soaking before it's planted. So when it's still in the pot, good soaking before you actually start to plant it.
Yeah, that sounds good. As far as for people in the opposite end of the spectrum who've got lots of roses and they want to grow roses where they've perhaps removed a rose bush or maybe a climber, which has been there for donkey's years. I mean, I know roses are pretty long-lasting plants. I know, many of our customers at the garden centre here, have had them in for 20, 30 years, but they always ask that question, can I plant a rose where a rose has possibly died? What's your thoughts on that?
I would not. I'm looking at Joe, who's in the market, and I'm not sure that that's the right answer. But I get the rose enthusiast who, and I guess I'll come across them as well, who desperately want, that's the perfect location, they want another rose in there. So I have known people to change the soil. So that if that desperate to use that position, but I think you need a rose, as we find with our fields, that once we've sort of been growing a rose in the field for 2 years, we do not want to go back to that field for 10 years, because basically the rose take something out of the soil, and that needs time to recover.
Right.
So basically, if you're going to replant, then try and change your soil, and then you definitely have to put a good lot of manure or composting and mulch it, ready feed it, and look after it.
Yep. No, that's very true. On the same sort of preface, then, if you are, you're really into your roses, or you're starting to grow them for the first time, sort of pruning times. Now, I was always taught at college, when you got to the end of the year, whatever rose you grow, you cut it back by half to stop the wind rocking it around. Well, even today, as we're recording this podcast, the wind's howling around. So, is there a good time to prune? Perhaps at the beginning of the year. When would you suggest for growers to be thinking in their gardens to be getting the secateurs out?
Well, your college days are right to a point. That once the flowering is finished, that helps, because that helps just to basically just take the top off, but basically only just take the flowering heads off. Mm-hmm. But the pruning, I think this year I actually pruned my roses at home in last week in January, but that is with an eye to the weather. If I knew there was a really bad February coming up, then I would wait until the weather had improved a bit. But it's basically any time from the end of January through to early March I would prune roses. And
would that be your sort of your HTs, your cluster flowered roses, or would that include your climbers as well?
With climber roses, you prune all roses, but with climbing roses, you're not pruning them hard back or back. You got to decide what you want from it and how vigorous you want it to be. So you're basically pruning it to what you want it to do.
Yeah. I mean, with climbers, you tend to have them around an arbor or up a pergola, perhaps, or up a trellis work, don't you? On the aspects of feeding your plants. So again, lots of different products on the market now to feed our roses. Some of them very specific to roses. But how often would you be feeding your roses? I mean, commercially, I suspect they do get a feed in the field. But what would you suggest for gardeners to get the best from their roses as far as giving them a feed?
Well, actually, on the nursery, we use a product which can also be used by the home gardener. Mm-hmm. It's called Uncle Tom's Tonic.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I have to say, no, it's not one I've come across, to be honest with you. So learn something new every day, Joe.
It's basically potassium phosphate. So it's organic, mm-hmm. And we use it as a foliar feed.
Okay.
And what we find is that it toughens the foliage up. It doesn't have much nitrogen in it, so it doesn't encourage a lot of lush growth, mm-hmm. but it encourages the growth that there is to be tough, which helps keep sort of nasty diseases that can come along out. So that's something that we use regularly in the nursery. And
yeah, so would that then help to deter things like mildew and black spot? If you're growing the plants a lot tougher, not giving them as much nitrogen, I suppose. Yeah. Okay, that's useful.
Sort of, works in that way. As if we were to have a tonic, it just gives us a more bigger.
It does indeed. Yes.
Yeah. So we use that on the nursery regularly.
Right, okay. And I suppose that is foliar action as well, which, I mean, certainly at the garden centre we do recommend to our customers that you foliar feed, whether they're using a seaweed-based type feed or even some of the soluble liquid fertilisers like Phosphagen and Miracle-Gro, they sort of will help. It's all about, obviously, careful timing with those, and you've obviously got to be careful you don't do it when the plants are in bloom. One question which a lot of people do ask is when is the best time to move a rose? Now, the practicalities of people moving house usually there's never a good time to move house, as we all know. But for your roses, is there a more practical time to actually lift them?
That's not something I would recommend. But if you're going to do it, end of October, November.
Okay.
But basically, you're given a dormancy period, but you're also given it 5 months of like guaranteed moisture, and so you're given it a good sort of rest before. If you move it in the spring, you're asking it to basically start work, and it's not always ready to start work.
Yeah.
So that's basically. I would say, like with your customers with their roses, I'd imagine most of them are buying them to plant during that time, I guess.
They are. We do try and sort of promote that as a good move as well. But you're quite right. Especially in view of the spring we've just experienced, it's not been very good to establish anything at all. The other question as well is, why are roses grafted? I mean, we were talking right at the beginning of the program about the podcast about that, but and not grown from cuttings. I mean, for you guys, if they could be grown from cuttings, it would probably be a lot easier. I think. Am I wrong?
I think for us, budding is the right thing to do, and you have to be I think in this day and age, a nursery has to be a specialist, and if you cannot do budding and cuttings at the same, we find we can't do buddings and cuttings at the same time. The cuttings are done really well in Holland, and but they've got robots and what have you all, and then it's like monocrops that they do well. But we're doing budding, we're and budded crops, and we're aiming for a more robust plant. So basically you've got to get longevity out of a budded rose, which I can't guarantee you've got to get out of a cutting rose. And they're a lot more reliable.
Yep.
That's one of the main points I would come across in that way, Joe.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, yeah, grafting is. I mean, also you've got control over the varieties. I suppose some varieties as well, as we know, just wouldn't grow well from cuttings. They just wouldn't produce a strong enough root system. So they need the oomph of a decent rootstock to support that top growth. As many, some of the varieties can be a little bit, as we know, quite tricky. Perhaps a question to both of you, actually. What tips would you give to growing roses in containers? Because obviously we sell an awful lot of more compact varieties of patio rose now. Any thoughts on getting the best from pots of roses?
Well, patio roses do naturally present themselves well in pots because they're nice and compact. But there's also floribundas and hybrid teas that can grow in pots. And actually, there's special patio climbers as well that will grow in a pot and get up to about 6 foot. I think the most important thing is to get as big a pot as possible, because to keep the rose looking good, you need to keep it well watered. And obviously, the bigger the pot, the easier it is to do that. So I think yeah, it's get as big a pot as possible, and choose a variety that if it's not a patio rose, then it's a nice compact growing variety, just because it'll look neater really as well in the pot.
Indeed, yeah, no,
yeah.
That's good there. We did have a question from one of our listeners actually, and it was about obviously the issues of black spot, and they still get a lot of problems with it. And is there anything else they can do other than spraying them? The person also said that they also liquid feed, but they wondered if there was a better way of feeding them to get better improved growing conditions, especially this year with the very wet weather. Obviously, I know you mentioned a product a bit early, but is there any other ways to get the plants in a healthier sort of mindset for the rest of this summer?
With rust, sometimes that does attack certain varieties, and you find the more the glossy-leaved, more modern varieties are less prone to rust attacks. Me, if I get rust at home in my garden, I'll clean up well round the base of the plant in the autumn, winter, and get rid of all the leaves and everything, and and then you use a disinfectant. No, here we're using sort of industrial type disinfectants, and I'll clean everything down after anything we do. But I told them I use diluted Jay's fluid. That's what I. And then basically you want the plant, the rust will do well in warm, wet weather. So good pruning sometimes help. If you've got a rose where the centre of the rose is absolutely packed, sometimes just to cut a shoot out of there to allow for more airflow around there is also is helpful. And then obviously once you've cleaned it up, disinfected it, and then a good mulch, and then just that's obviously lacking in something, so that doesn't that, and then probably potash, and then need good feed.
Yeah, no, that sounds a good plan of action. Certainly, I mean, obviously the products, sort of like Rose Clear Ultra and such like, obviously are sort of three-pronged in their effect, aren't they? And we tend to encourage customers to spray regularly, from once the plants break leaf in the spring, and obviously on a regular sort of 3 or 4 week sort of spraying program to keep on top, especially if black spot and mildew is an issue. And of course this year, aphids have been a real problem because of the very cold start to the spring, and then obviously the very wet May. So like all sort of podcasts, we'd like to try and get our guests to give us a little bit of an insight of what's going on in the gardening trade. So what do you think people are looking for at the moment in selecting roses? And as we know, we've had issues, obviously, through the pandemic over the last year and a half of supply. But what thoughts do you have of what people are looking for at the moment in roses?
When it comes to colour, sort of purples are quite popular. Vibrant colours, they're always popular. Gift varieties remain popular. People still looking for those. A lot of people looking for perhaps more shrubby, informal style roses that are lend themselves more to mixed planting. So perhaps not sort of moving away from a formal rose bed, more towards a mixed sort of cottage gardeny look.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Climbers have gone really well this year. So whether that's because people have spent more time in their gardens and they're looking, they fill the garden, but they've perhaps not covered all their fences and walls. But climbing roses have been popular, and fragrance remains, sort of always a popular feature.
But for sure, I've been growing. I think you introduced your timeless roses a couple of years ago, and I've planted a few this season, and they're just coming into bud and flower now.
Yeah,
obviously. Yeah. So the timeless rose is basically a florist rose with not really it's an amazing thing. Certainly on the picture label, it's good. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, they're very fragrant, and they make good cut flower as well. So they sort of extra good value. I mean, you can keep them in the garden; they're quite happy there. But they do make good flower, so you can bring them in. If the bud's just sort of starting to show colour, if you cut it then, bring it indoors, they open up, and you can just make really sort of nice informal flower arrangements from them. And they really will fill a room with the scent. Just one little tip is just to keep refreshing the water.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Important.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's 4 colours. We've got a pink, a purple, a reddy pink, and a cream. And I think people just enjoy cutting their own flowers and bringing them into the home.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I mean, cut flower and the cutting patch is becoming quite a trend now in lots of people's gardens, especially with the cost of flowers in our florists and supermarkets costing so much. You mentioned scent there. Could I put you on the spot? I know that fragrance can be incredibly subjective, but what do you think? As far as Wharton's roses and roses in general, what's your sort of top of the fragrant pop charts?
Well, we've had much discussion over this. So we think our top 5, in no particular order, We've got Timeless Purple that we've just been talking about.
Okay.
Arthur Bell, which is a real classic yellow.
Lovely.
Floribunda. Scent from Heaven, which is a climber, and as its name implies, it's got great scent. Special Anniversary, which is lovely pink HT, that's got an amazing scent, and Fragrant Cloud.
Right, very traditional variety.
It is. It does have an amazing scent. It perhaps has other challenges in that you do need to look after it, but it does have an amazing fragrance, and can't get away from that. But just if I can, just touching on the because fragrance and roses is quite a feature. But what we are always keen to get across is that there's some fantastic newer varieties that might not have a sort of a knock your socks off fragrance, but they make great garden plants and just flower for such long length of time. You mustn't sort of set them aside just because.
Oh no! I quite agree.
Yeah.
So could we put some names on some of those varieties, Jo?
Yeah, we've just introduced a range called the Precious range. So we've got Gold, Amber, Love, and Ruby, and they will flower from May through to the sort of first hard frosts of sort of mid to late October, and they just flower and flower. And I don't think there's a lot of shrubs that would sort of compare to that kind of performance.
No.
So,
very, very healthy too.
Good plant health then. So good disease resistance. Yes.
Oh yeah. I think I should probably, because I always think it doesn't exactly go without saying, but when we're trialing our roses, that is the key thing we're looking for is disease resistance.
Yeah.
Because we think that that is the key to them performing in people's gardens. So that is one of the, and we wouldn't introduce something if we thought there was a weakness there. So that's one of the key things that we're looking for when we're bringing in roses to trial is that sort of disease resistance.
So, as you probably know, on some of the questions we like to pose, the desert island question has to come up. So, do you have either, both of you, a suggestion for a rose you could enjoy if you're ever stranded on a desert island, and perhaps which rose or roses would you like to grow?
Well, for myself, I've got two or three. The Scent from Heaven, like Joe just mentioned, that's an orange climber, and I think that's just got a fantastic name. Whoever thought that, then I definitely needed a slap on the back, because it's just a perfect description, and that's a very, very healthy. That's not nearly evergreen all through the winter, and that's a beautiful orange scented climber, absolutely gorgeous. But every year I seem to change what I like because when I sort of see things changing in the fields. 2 years ago I liked a whiter shade of pale. That's a light pink HT, and that's a beautiful plant when I saw it. But last year, the variety called Queen Bee, which is an Amber Floribunda, caught my eye, and that was definitely the top performer on our fields last year.
Okay, I think some good names. I'll have to investigate those last two varieties, James. They sound really good.
Not being 100% politically correct here, I do like David Austin's Gertrude Jekyll. That's a good old rose, but that's all. I know we don't grow it, and Joe look at me.
I've just fallen off my chair.
It's allowed. Okay.
So that's a old traditional rose, but that's a lovely scented rose.
It is. It makes a fine scent, and as we always say, other rose growers are available. So we want to be all inclusive on this podcast. So that's good. And you, Joe, have you got a desert island rose favourite?
Well, I have chosen Flower Carpet Pink. It's the classic flower carpet shade, and I've really chosen that because I know it would grow probably on a desert island.
Okay.
Because you can just it's sort of bone hardy, cast iron, it's going to perform wherever it is, and for a long time as well. So, and it repeat flowers, and flower cut, and it doesn't need any pruning or fancy pruning. So, I've not got my secateurs with me on the desert island. There's no issue. So, flower carpet pink for me.
Oh, they're great choices. Yeah. So they're perfect. Okay. The Hampton Court Flower Show is gone for another year. Obviously, it didn't happen last year, and obviously Hampton Court's famous for many things. It's one of the best summer flowering shows, really, in every sense of the word. Wonderful gardens and fantastic marquees. But something happens in one of the marquees, which a few years ago I was able to witness on one of the press days, and that's a rose christening. So, could you perhaps spill the beans for the Rose of the Year 2022?
Yes, it is. It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, great. Oh.
Yeah, it's a lovely peachy coloured floribunda. It goes darker the warmer it is, so it really is sort of a lovely peachy blend to it, and was bred by Dixon's, the Irish rose breeder.
Okay.
So yes, it's a Wonderful Life, and a lovely name as well.
Yes, it's perfect. Oh, that's really, really good to hear. So that's something we can look out for. We'll look out for later on this year.
Yeah, this autumn will be the first time it's available. Yeah, as a bare root plant, which I'm sure you'll be stocking.
Indeed, yes, we hope to, and I'm sure it'll be appearing in many garden centres up and down the country. And further afield, hopefully, from.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it's always a keenly anticipated event, one of the Rose of the Year. So it's a wonderful
life. Yes. Well, it's been a wonderful chat with both James Taylor from Whartons and Joe Davey. Thank you both very much for your time today, and thank you for inspiring us with all things roses.
Thank you, Chris, very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, that was an interesting interview, wasn't it, Chris?
It was indeed, Peter. Yeah, covered an awful lot of ground, and my word, there's a lot to growing the good old humble rose, isn't there?
Isn't there, Justin? James mentioned something there called Rose of the Year. Can you talk us through what that is a bit more, Chris?
Yeah, indeed. So Rose of the Year was started back in 1982, and it's really about promoting the rose, promoting a variety of rose which is representative of the rose industry. And the first one which had that accolade was Rose Mountbatten, named after obviously Mountbatten, and it was a wonderful, if I remember rightly, it was a wonderful yellow rose, hybrid tea, a stunning rose. And then every year since, we've had one, obviously amalgamating to this year. But yes, Sent from Heaven was Rose of the Year back in 2017, and this year's Rose of the Year is Belle de Jour, which we actually stocked at the garden centre here, and I'm sure if you go out and about in garden centres, you will see it in pots, and it's a nice worthy winner, a wonderful double sort of yellow with a sort of pink edge to it, lots of fragrance, an incredible amount of fragrance, and it's good that the Rose of the Year exists, because I think it's a really good advertisement for the rose industry, but more to the point, to bring out the best of what the growers are producing, around the world, around in Europe as well as the UK.
Yeah, because it's interesting, we're talking about sort of some of the features of roses. You kindly brought in this selection of three roses that you cut from your garden today, and it's just sat here. I was like, lovely waft of smell of roses just drifting over to me all the time now. And so talk us through these three that you've brought us in today, Chris.
Right, so the one which has been a Rose of the Year, that's a few years ago actually. That came about, I think it was 2010.
Yep.
And that had that accolade of that particular year, and I'm just racking my brains. Yeah, and the variety is Belle de Jour, which is a lovely one. Yeah, a real double.
Yes, it's really a compact flower there, isn't it, with masses of petals in it.
Yeah, and good fragrance too. Good, quite a nice sort of typical fruity sort of flavour of spices, I suppose, is how you describe rose. I know you have certain terminology. I think myrrh is one of the things they have to put into rose smells as well, isn't it? There's lots of terminology there.
Because the pink one that you've brought us in now, that's I think when you bought it was Paul Smith, and now it's Sir Paul Smith.
It's got a knighthood, yes, literally in a few hours. Yes.
He's been knighted now.
It did,
so
yes.
Tell us a bit about the story of that one, because I mean the aroma of that it's lovely and sweet, and what I would sort of instantly know as the smell of a rose.
Indeed, and that's probably what I was drawn to it when I saw it in a garden a few years ago, and then I saw we were selling it. It's actually a Peter Beals introduction, so it's one to look out for from his stable.
Because he was a rose breeder from the, I'm going to say 60s, 70s, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right, yes.
And he had his own nursery over Cambridge way, I think.
I think it's actually just down the road from where Wharton's roses are based. I think they were in Norfolk, if memory serves me correctly, in that neck of the woods, which is interesting in itself, isn't it? So obviously the soil is rather good.
East Anglia must be the place to grow roses.
Indeed, yes. But yes, Sir Paul Smith, and the story is that it was gifted by his wife, Lady Smith.
Excellent.
As a birthday present. Now, I mean,
how nice.
That's rather nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's got all the sort of colour and integrity. Obviously, Paul Smith, well known for his amazing designs, and I think that as a designer rose, it certainly sits in quite comfortably. And of course, if you have a look at Paul Smith rose perfume, then there's plenty of those on the market too. So it's obviously a brand in itself.
Yeah, because I know when I got married, I was one of my ushers kindly gave me or gave us all us the ushers and grooms ties for the occasion, and they were Paul Smith ties, and surprisingly they have a pink rose on them.
There you go. So yes,
he was obviously inspired by his present from his wife.
Indeed, that's great. That's a great story too. Yeah. So yeah, and as I say, surely when you're choosing a rose, it is all about fragrance. At this time of year, when you're having a walk around rose gardens or you're out and about in the garden centre, get your nose close to those blooms, yes.
Without a doubt, because I think that's the crucial thing. At this time of the year, obviously, roses are, like you say, sort of in flower, and it's such a great time to be buying roses.
Most definitely, yeah.
You get to see the whole package, as they say.
Yes, indeed. And, we do live in a bit of a dream factory in the garden centre, Will, which is so good. We rely on lovely colour picture labels when plants are not doing their thing. But at this time of the year, when they're actually in full flow, in full bloom, then yes, no better way of choosing a rose for your garden or two.
Yeah, and just thinking a bit more about sort of going around the garden. Rose gardens, I mean, there's obviously various different sort of forms of the traditional rose garden. I mean, my archetypal image of a rose garden is a very sort of uniform, regimented design. There's lots of rectangles and possibly a circle or two, or a diagonal, and bit of grass in between. A
few standard roses, maybe.
Yes, standard roses, and everything's swept up and nice and clean, which obviously helps keep the rust at bay.
Of course.
And nice open sort of spaces in between the roses so that they get lots of good air movement. And generally not shaded by trees. So,
lots of sunshine, yes.
But can you think of any sort of outstanding rose gardens that maybe our listeners could go and visit if they're close to them? Yeah,
there are one or two. I mean, obviously the notable ones are if you go to any of the RHS gardens like Wisley, Hyde Hall. Obviously, you go up to the new Bridgewater Gardens near Manchester. Obviously, they've just recently opened, and they've got plenty of roses on. I noticed on arbours and on columns.
Right.
Of course, Kifsgate. Famous, obviously, in the Cotswolds for the Kifsgate Rose, and that's the home of that. I know we took a party of our garden centre customers there a few years ago, and they thoroughly enjoyed seeing Kifsgate in its full glory in early July, so a good time to go and see it then. And then local to the garden centre here, we've got obviously like Blenheim Palace over near Woodstock, which is particularly good. They've got nice rose gardens, and actually thinking about it, good old Wadston Manor has a nice rose garden too, so plenty to be had there. But there is a really good facility on one of the websites, which we will put a link to on our podcast show notes to guide you to, I think it's about 50 of the top rose gardens in Britain, so plenty of ideas there. But of course, if you're travelling worldwide, then look out for roses on your travels, because you will come across some fabulous rose gardens in Australia, obviously America, Canada, Italy, all the far-flung places. People just love the English rose.
Excellent. And maybe we could call for another hashtag there, Chris.
I think so,
if any of our international listeners, now I know we've got a few Canadians and a few Americans already listening to the show, which are so pleased to see on our sort of world map of where people are listening from.
Shall we call it hashtag more roses?
Definitely.
Yes.
Hashtag more roses and see if any of our listeners can spot a nice rose or a nice rose garden.
Indeed. That'd be great.
So just thinking about the rose, Chris, I mean, we've covered the fact that obviously they've got a beautiful perfume, and interesting fact I learnt recently was it takes about 500,000 flowers to make a ton of rose petals.
Wow.
And then it takes, depending on the variety of rose you've got, about 4 to 5 tons of rose petals to make 1 litre of essential oil. So that's a lot of rose picking, isn't it?
Indeed, yes. Yeah, and of course we tend to think of roses within the garden, but of course they have a use, as we say, for food. Rose wine.
Rose wine, and rose hip wine.
Rose hip wine,
I think. Obviously the other, rose hip wine and rose vinegar and rose hip jam and rose jam and a favourite that I can remember from my childhood, Turkish Delight.
Of course, yes, Turkish Delight.
Which I think has rose water in, which is also used from memory as a skin tonic. I think it was good for, or purportedly good for eczema and sort of skin irritations.
Right.
Which I find quite interesting because I sort of remember as a little boy, as a prank, we used to pick rose hips because we were told that was what made itching powder.
Okay.
And you'd crush the rose hip up and chuck it down your friend's back, sort of shirt neck, and then give it a good rub. And like I say, I find it interesting because obviously rose oil or sort of, rose water is a calming thing. So maybe it was the ends of the rose hip, the sort of jaggedy, sharp, petally bit, the remnants of the petals, which was the thing that irritated you. But
oh gosh, yes, that's yeah. I know another little fact as well. Roses actually form, as we know, thorns.
Yep.
Yes, but they're not actually thorns. They are the term is a prickle, which is a slightly different term as far as the way the thorn is made.
Okay.
It's a little bit like, I'm sure many of our listeners know about cacti produce, obviously, cacti spikes.
Yep.
But those evolutionary were the leaves which folded up. So they folded up so tightly because if you think where cacti are, they're in the hot desert, they transpire, they lose a lot of moisture from their leaves. So over evolution, those basically
leaves have turned into spikes.
Yeah. So I wonder with the rose, is that the same thing? They carried more leaves at one point, and that might explain why they were found far afield, over in China, in Persia, in lots of areas of the globe where perhaps they had to adapt to the conditions, and that's maybe why some varieties are more thorny than others.
Excellent. I never knew that. Thanks for that, Chris.
It's all right.
And another, I think it was a Victorian remedy, I'll say, from roses was obviously cough syrup. So you get some rose petals, steep them in honey, and then potentially mix them with some rosehip wine.
Yep.
And that it formed a cough syrup because the wine obviously is from memory, it's a very slow maturing wine. It's not one that you can make and drink that year. It needs several years to mature, and once it has matured, it can be a very, very nice wine. And just thinking sort of on things that take a while to mature, and obviously relaxing and getting older in life as some of us are, after a hard day in the garden, something that can be really nice is a bath with lots of rose petals in and a bit of Epsom salts, which helps you sort of scrub off all the mud from your digging and relax and wind down after a hard day in the garden. So with August a couple of weeks away now, we hope you'd like to join us in a couple of Wednesdays' time for us to discuss what tips we can come up with for August. Have we got any thoughts yet, Chris?
Yeah, I think we're going to do a little bit on propagation, because it's the month for making more of your plants, and maybe looking at what you're going to do with your harvest. Hopefully we're going to be into a bumper harvest season then, so a few ideas there.
Excellent. And yeah, because just thinking it'd be, sort of my runner beans should be in full crop by then, so hopefully I can share with you some runner bean tapenade, which is very similar to a hummus in texture, but made out of runner beans.
That sounds good.
Nice little thing to dip breadsticks into, and hopefully it'll be nice and sunny, and we'll be able to get out in the garden and enjoy relaxing a bit more.
Indeed, and enjoying our roses as well.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, Peter. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.